Hello, everybody. Oh, thank you so much for being there. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you again for Fairfax County Library for having this very important dialogue, intra-faith dialogue, to be honest with you, because we are all Muslim or self-identified Muslim women here on the panel today. And I wanted to say, we keep having these conversations. It was brought up in our group of Mamiwa Muslim group where we were talking about hijab and personal choices. And to be blunt with you, it got a little bit heated. And part of the reason for this is to kind of give voice to everybody and their viewpoints. The hijab is a symbol of an Islamic attitude. The Islamic attitude is that a Muslim woman will not be taken advantage of, and she is not the object for desire of other people. And she is not meant to be played with, whether it is a literal or figurative interpretation of what hijab actually is. We're going to talk about that today on Behind the Veil. I'm so excited by my panel of very powerful women in front of me. I have my beautiful, lovely co-host, Dr. Uzma Joffrey. She is a mama of four who came to her hijab journey a little bit later in life, at 19 years of age, and she never really looked back. She's a lifelong self-described feminist and believes that hijab is a personal choice, path to physical and spiritual freedom, and Islamic requirement she's happy to discuss here today. We have Dr. Sabah Maroof. She's a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist and also a mother of four. She actually started wearing hijab as a young teen, and she had to return to the basics and roots of her interpretation and choice again and again. Having embarked on adulthood in post 9/11 world, she has found herself to be in a minority within a minority and has to grapple with actually what it means to her to be an American Muslim and a woman who wears hijab. We have Sadaf Abdullah, who is a lawyer and a mom of three who cares very deeply about civil rights, especially for the right of women to choose whether or not to wear a headscarf. For Sadaf, the concept of hijab in Islamic terms represents the principle of modesty and includes behavior as well as dress for both male and female. So I am very excited to have you all here today, and we're just going to get this
Uh-oh.
Okay. I was wondering if she froze for everyone or just...
I think she's frozen kind of like y'all's weather on the East Coast. So, and I believe Rabinder is still there. Maybe not.
Yes, I'm here. So
okay, great.
I'll let you continue, Uzma.
Okay. Well, this happens a lot on our podcast. So when it does, I just kind of pick it up and say, let's get this party started. And maybe start with Sadaf. I think the idea that Zeba had was for you to introduce your understanding of hijab, your approach to it, and what it means to you.
Sure. Thanks to the library for having me as part of this panel. I'm very much looking forward to having a great discussion today. And I want to start by just giving you my background and kind of how I thought about hijab in childhood, because it changed drastically in my early adulthood. So I am the child of Muslim Pakistani immigrants, and I grew up in North Carolina, which, is a conservative place, both in terms of the Muslim community, but also in terms of the larger community, as you might imagine. So there's a heavy influence of religion in everyone's lives. Conservative values are placed, pretty high up in terms of what we should strive to. So my understanding of hijab at that point was shaped by three primary sources. One, and probably the most doctrinal, was Sunday school at the mosque. And many of the teachers there were of Arab descent, very influenced by Arab culture, tending towards the conservative side. And I was always taught that hijab means covering your hair and that it's required. And then another source of influence were my Muslim friends. And so I had a number of friends that in middle school and high school began covering their hair. Again, they went to the same Sunday school classes I did. They had some family influence. And I will say, as an aside, many of them have later in life stopped covering their hair, but at the time, they started this and were met with a lot of praise in the community. And then my third influence was my own family. While I was growing up, no one in my household covered their hair, but it was more of a cultural thing where my mom was raised. It wasn't, modesty was a paramount consideration. It was, all about dressing in loose clothing and covering yourself otherwise, but the hair cover was not as emphasized in her family. However, she did ultimately in my early adulthood start covering her hair, and she still does to this day. So all of these three sources in my childhood kind of converged to make me think that hijab means covering your hair, and that's required. So when I went to college, that was my belief. But at the time, I personally was not covering my hair. And, as happens to many of us in college, you start reflecting on your choices more. I joined the Muslim Students Association, started thinking about those things a little bit more. And it got to the point where the cognitive dissonance between believing that hijab is required and not doing it myself really got to be a problem. And I confronted myself and I said, okay, I need to do this if I believe it's required. But I wanted to be sure. Because it's a big step. And so I decided at that point that I'm going to do the research. I'm going to read basically everything I can put my hands on about hijab, including and especially scholars who have written about it, and kind of try to see if I can parse through and come to some sort of conclusion. And I will mention for the folks that are not Muslim, in Islam, we've got two considerations when you're talking about seekers of knowledge. One is we are encouraged to ask questions. So, certainly Muslims are told that they should ask and reason and try to figure out things for themselves. But at the same time, there's also the concept that there are people that are more knowledgeable, that have studied these things in depth, that have done the contextual research into what the Quran says and what the Prophet Muhammad did, and that those are all important considerations too when we look at any particular verses or any concepts in Islam. So again, that was my goal. I was already very familiar with the verses in the Quran that are cited to support covering your hair. So my focus was really finding how those interpretations have differed, and so I did a lot of reading of folks like Khalid Abu al-Fadl, who is a Muslim scholar, a jurist, and then also Muslim women feminists like Fatima Mernissi and other people like her. And in the end, I came to my own personal conclusion that I was not convinced that Islam requires covering your hair. And if I'm honest, it was part of a general awakening about misogyny in general that's pervasive in basically all of the worlds I'm in, not just in the Islamic world, but even, in day-to-day life here. And it was the beginning of a journey that basically even continues today in terms of me examining my beliefs and the foundations for them. However, I was convinced through this process that there is a different kind of hijab that is essentially part of being a Muslim. And that applies to both men and women and has more to do with being modest, things like keeping a respectful distance. And it has a somewhat fluid meaning. As I mentioned before, in my household growing up, it meant wearing loose clothing and long clothing and not dating. But regardless of exactly how it's implemented, there's a substantial emphasis on modesty. And that is what I have personally tried to embrace, implement, and teach my children. And then my final point is that having said all of this, I have a very acute awareness that this is my belief and it is not the belief of others. And I can see why Muslim women may reach the conclusion that they think the headscarf is a required part of hijab or recommended or spiritually desirable, however you want to put that. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way either. Neither side is guaranteed to be correct at the end of the day. I think we all believe that God is the ultimate judge of actions. But in me, both then and now, sisters who cover their hair will find a fierce advocate for their right to choose to wear it and their right to not suffer any discrimination, harassment, or ill effects of any kind. As I mentioned, my mom does cover her hair now. My best friend covers her hair. 3 of my sisters-in-law do. They are all very accomplished women, amazing women who I have nothing but respect for. And so the bottom line is, I really think that religious expression is personal. And so we all have different paths to where we are. And ultimately, I think they're all legitimate because I think they all come from a place of us trying to do our best to please God.
No, I love that, Sada. Thank you so much. And you raised an important point in that fact that you were searching for your answers through looking up materials of scholars and scholarly interpretation. And the one thing I do want to point out here today is that nobody on the panel is a certified Islamic scholar in any stretch of their imagination, nor are we pretending to be so. What we are doing is giving you our personal interpretation and our personal response to what we feel hijab means to us. So I just wanted to say that right away. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead from your viewpoint, Sadaf, and go to Uzma's perspective of how Islam is mandates that you wear hijab, and that's part of her identity as a feminist Muslim woman.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll kind of pattern my answer like Sadaf did so beautifully. And it was, growing up as the child of subcontinental immigrants to the United States, it was just, I mean, that was hijab is mandatory, Did anybody force it? No, both sides of my family were not people that covered anything. They weren't even people that prayed. They were Ramadan Muslims. So, it was pretty lax, but it was, when you get religious and when you get old, that's when you go do the Hajj, and that's when you start covering when you're old. But it is required. And, I also didn't have a lot of sources. There was no extended family here. We were the only people out of 7 brothers and sisters. My dad was the only one in America. So we really didn't have anything. The Islamic schools weren't very established, and very early on, my parents decided not to send me. It just wasn't convenient because they were busy earning livings. So my Islamic education was lacking for a very, very long time. And so what I saw was a lot of subcontinental Muslims, if they practiced, which the first time I think I remember anybody wearing hijab, I was probably 15. So that was pretty significant for me. And, my understanding of the way that hijab is supposed to be worn wasn't even being fulfilled, because when there were social events, these people took their hijabs off, but when they were in the masjid, or if they came to your house, maybe they would wear it. But certainly as we all became more eligible and, people are starting to do the matchmaking or preliminary matchmaking, at least in their heads, that hijab would fly right off. And I would make fun of them because I'm like, believing in God is not when it's convenient for me thing. It should be a constant. And that is one gift that my parents did give me, was a very strong belief in God and my relationship with him, and that I can always turn to him. They did mandate the kind of spiritual understanding of hijab or modesty, where it's your shirts must be long enough to cover your butt. We never show anything. If I will say, up until college, I did wear short sleeve t-shirts, but everything was bought in the men's section. So I wore very baggy clothes, nothing form-fitting. It was really cool at the time because in high school it was like grunge wear. It was like perfect for a Muslim girl. But I didn't wear anything on my head. The reason why I started still dressing modestly, still kind of, critical, I will admit, completely critical and judgmental of the Muslim girls who did do the off and on convenient hijab. I entered college, and the point for me happened. I remember I walked into the Honors College library, and at that point, my brother was on campus. So this is my second year of college. And a Muslim brother who I had been saying salam to all the time, and he never returned my salam, even though our parents were family friends. It was we tended to kind of separate. He's younger than me. But he never said salam. And I even complained to my mom, like, I think you should call his mom and tell him that he doesn't return the greeting of peace. It's considered really rude to do that. And when my brother was there in the library, he got up to leave with me. And that guy was like, "Where are you going?" He said, "Oh, my sister is here. I'm leaving now." And that brother said to him, "Oh, I didn't know she was Muslim. Like we'd been going to school together for 2 years and had shared the same classes. And to me, that was absolutely devastating because, again, my parents had instilled such strong faith in God to me. I was, the Muslim kid growing up in the same district. Everybody knew I was Muslim from kindergarten to 12th grade, the same class, basically, grew up with me. And I had been the big fish in a small pond. Now I get to university and nobody knows who I am, including this guy who's literally family friends with me. And then I knew, I was like, to me, the most strong identifier of who I am is my faith. I need to wear it. But now it was a matter of timing. I was really blessed. Most American girls, when they wear it in America, they face a lot of discrimination. They face a lot of angst about, is this the right time? Is this right for me? Maybe they feel pressured to do it or forced to do it by their families. I was going to the Umrah, which is the lesser pilgrimage in Islam. So it's a lot easier to do. My first week wearing hijab was that. And once I put it on in Saudi airspace, I said, I'm never going to take it off again. And alhamdulillah, praise be to God, I have never regretted my decision. And coming back from that trip, I felt compelled because when you wear hijab, one of the things that happens is that liberal people start to free you and they insist on freeing you. And so to be able to defend my position and my decision, I started studying like the actual textual verses for it. And I was convinced that I did the right thing for myself. So it was a little bit backwards for me. But again, I'm convinced that this is the right way. If I never leaned back on Sharia law or on our laws, I would just point to the fact that when we pray 5 times a day, which is obligatory for all Muslims, we clearly have to cover our hair. Like those proofs are clear. When we're buried, we have a death shroud like our Jewish brothers and sisters do. Women's hair is covered in that one as well. So for those reasons, if nothing else, I'm like, when we go to meet God, we're wearing it. So why not just wear it every day? It just makes it a lot easier, to get it. Now, do I believe in choice? Absolutely, 110%. I was a feminist, I don't know, I think from like elementary school. People, sadly, it's a terrible word and I hope people don't use it, but my name in high school was feminazi because I just was I was actually a man hater. I don't think I was a feminist. But women's rights were always really important to me, but that has nothing to do with the hijab. It was realizing that the hijab is a feminist movement and it is a feminist statement, and all the power that Islam gave me as a woman came to fruition for me when I was in college. And so that's why it's part of my practice today.
I definitely appreciate that viewpoint. And I know, Sabah, just knowing a little bit about you and some of the conversations that we've had privately, you obviously wear hijab in the literal sense, but you have had some of these moments where you're just like, I just don't know if I should wearing it. You're going back and forth, or like Uzma kind of said a little bit, like those Muslim women that were kind of taking it on and off because you weren't quite sure if you were solidified in your particular, your particular voice to be able to wear it. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about how you ultimately came to wearing hijab and why you sometimes still struggle with wearing it?
Yes, thank you. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to the library for hosting this event. Thank you, Zeba, Sadaf, and Uzma. I really enjoyed just listening to both of your reflections. And I kind of feel like I'm kind of somewhere, maybe perhaps in the middle. Definitely a lot of your experiences ring true for kind of what my experience has been. Sadaf, how you were describing the community that you grew up in, and that really a big sense of familiarity with that, because I think you're right. Well, there was probably 2 sides as I was growing up. There was the more, we had Sunday school. We used to have like little classes with the, there would always be like a friend of our mom's that was a little bit more, more well-read and knowledgeable when we didn't have access to Sunday school, because I lived overseas for a little bit too. And we would have like little, we call them darses, or like little lesson classes that we would have. This was in the 90s. And so I think, as I mentioned as Zeba mentioned in my intro, in my bio, that I did start wearing it at a kind of a young age. And part of that, I don't think that it wasn't something definitely that was forced upon me, but I would agree with Sadaf how you were describing how there was a lot of encouragement from the community. I definitely felt that. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Actually, as an adult, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, did I start with the right intention? And I think I did. And I do think that I did. But it's also means that it's not something that I take for granted. And it can never be something that I take for granted. And I definitely think over the years, it's definitely been something that I feel like I have to kind of keep going back and renewing my intention and understand, why am I wearing it? How did I make this decision? And how do I continue to make the decision to, to kind of continue with this? At the same time, though, we're starting it at a young age. I think it also helped shape my identity in many ways. And I think now looking back, I think that I find the blessing in being able to be, it helped me be proud of who I was, to be able to show my identity. And it's something that I definitely grew into in a way. I also had to go back and just to be able to answer questions, right? When people would ask why I can't, I definitely have to understand why I was wearing it. And so I too had to go back and look at, read different sources, read different interpretations. I think we had to read Fatima Mernissi for a college class, actually, Sadaf. So I remember hers, actually, I think her title of her book is similar title as this panel, actually. Behind or beyond the veil or something. But I also know as I was growing up, I definitely, this is also the 90s when Muslims were portrayed in a very one-dimensional way. And I knew that whatever I was doing, I did not want to be categorized or seen in that as a stereotypical oppressed Muslim woman. And even though and I don't think any of us have actually even met any woman that's characterized like that in our own lives. But I just was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to make sure that my voice is heard. And, like I'm sure all of you just did not let that stop me from being involved and making sure that my voice was heard on, in different platforms. But again, wearing it from a young age did kind of, I think, meant that it was kind of part of my identity development. Now, Zeba, you had kind of mentioned that, and I know that we've talked about it a little bit. I think that's kind of more in recent years, and maybe it's something that's come up earlier. I just don't remember because we kind of have sometimes these thoughts and we just keep living and going with our lives. But it's kind of funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, so I guess I'm going to be, and I think we're all a similar age, so I don't care really about the age thing, but I wonder if I did, now that I was talking to a friend about this whole thing about like wondering about it and like, did I make the right choice? Did I interpret it the right way? Was I influenced by, what was kind of in the 90s, what was the majority, like who was kind of, where were we getting our teachings from, because as Sadaf mentioned, this is something that's not really, and Uzma too, that's not really emphasized. We're all from the subcontinent. Our parents are from India, Pakistan. It's not really something that was emphasized with our grandparents' culture, but they had a very, very strong sense of modesty. So my mom would always tell me that. She was like, I didn't wear hijab, but when we would drive to school, we had curtains on our in our cars, or they had a driver that would take them to school, and they were very modest. There was no interaction with the males and females. As I was talking to a friend of mine, she kind of brought this up. She's like, I kind of wonder if it's like part of our like midlife crisis. And I was like, wow, I didn't think of that as we were all approaching 40. And I'm like, yeah, maybe that's it. Okay, well, I don't have to go get an expensive car. I can just be like, okay, do I want to wear a hijab? Yeah, I think I want to keep wearing it. Okay, I'm good. I think it's important to have that questioning every once in a while, because you never want to be complacent in whatever you're doing. You never want to just do it because you're used to it or because it's easier to just continue to do it. And I think for me at this point, it's, honestly, for me personally, and my husband will definitely attest to this, it's a challenge for me to fulfill all the religious duties that we do have. I'm not like, well, I won't go into detail about that, but it can be challenging being a mother, having a career, being inherently lazy. I can be very lazy at times. And that sometimes I feel like this is one act that I can do that, and I feel like I can do it consistently. And I think that's kind of why I keep wearing it, because at this point, I mean, I've been wearing it for over 20 years, and I don't want to take away from the, you know, if I had that intention in the beginning and the right intention that I felt this is something that God wants me to do and I'm going to do it. Because in a way, you're like, what else matters? If this is what I want to do for my creator, whether it's, you know, mandatory or not. And I shy away from talking about that because I don't want, this is just kind of a personal thing, like maybe how I feel about it. And I don't want anybody to feel that I think that they're not doing, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really want to, but it's just just a personal thing for me. And I don't really want to take away from the years where I was wearing it. And I think at this point, as I mentioned, it really kind of has, you know, kind of become part of my identity in a way. It's a consistent thing that I can do. And so that's, you know, that's kind of, I think, why I continue to wear it.
The universal thing that I think all three of you guys had is that you took it upon yourself to actually do the research and come up with your own viewpoint about it. So that's something that I definitely appreciate. So I have to say a story, and this involves Uzma. We were on a trip where we were doing some marketing things, and I remember we were in a car, and I came out, and the guy was really nice to me, and then Uzma comes out, and he was definitely a little bit like, I'd never really experienced that. So I was like, oh, wow, it really is a different experience in how you're treated. So the one thing I have to say, especially in a post 9/11 America, and Sadaf, you mentioned that you are, as an attorney, you fight for the civil rights for people. Can you talk a little bit about what are the steps that people can take to kind of preserve their civil rights in wearing hijab?
Yeah, so your religion is a protected class, and if you have sincerely held religious beliefs that dictate certain things, such as hijab, you have a right to do that in this country. You have a right to wear it. You have a right to employment while wearing it, as well as a variety of other things. And so, I think it's a difficult question in the post-Trump world, because so much has happened in the last 4 years that we could have never imagined. Post 9/11, I don't know if that was as bad as post-Trump or during Trump. Sorry to get political on you, but in any case, it's no secret that obviously the Muslim community has faced a lot of oppression through the last 4 years because of the beliefs of certain people regarding Muslims. And so to me, I think it's a matter of continuing to be visible, continuing to stand your ground. You have a right to be here. You are American. You have a right to practice your religion. That is a core value of our Constitution. And so, that to begin with, and that also can translate to, if you are being discriminated against, speak up. There's no way we're going to know about it unless you speak up. Find organizations that help with that. I mean, the ACLU is not Muslim specific, but they deal with tons of discrimination cases for Muslims. And then there are Muslim specific organizations out there as well. We have a ton in Dallas, and in many of the big cities, you can find them. I think a lot of Muslim women especially will shy away and just let it go and say, okay, I don't want to create a fight. But it's not really creating a fight. It's just making a statement that you belong here too. And so that's what I would say, is always speak up, always stand your ground, always make it known. Now, of course, be safe. I don't mean to, actually pick physical fights and things like that. But, if it's a store that's making you uncomfortable, go talk to the manager, be a Karen. We have the right to be.
I love that you said that, be a Karen or be an Aisha. We're going to call it be an Aisha at these stores. No, I really, I have to say, like, I've seen it, I've heard it, but I'd never personally experienced it. So seeing it in real life was definitely an eye opener to me personally. So I appreciate like people like yourself, Sadaf, that are actually fighting for the rights of all religions, because I know it's not just about Muslims and Islam. So I definitely appreciate that. And again, the microaggressions add up. If you feel weird, like Sadaf says, please speak up about it, because who else is going to have your voice but yourself? But Sabah, you mentioned a little bit about starting hijab a little bit earlier and not necessarily understanding the reasons why you started it, because it was just something that was ingrained into your family culture. As a mother, how do you feel about your daughter specifically, or your sons marrying somebody with hijab, or your daughter wearing hijab? Is it something that you would have her choose on her own, guide her towards that, or kind of let her make the decision?
I think, well, I mean, of course, not me, right? Of course, kids, you know, especially when they're younger, they model after their parents. And, you know, as we all Muslim parents know, you know, especially when kids are very young, they're really watching us, even when we don't realize it. It's really funny. I was able to see my parents live out of state. Actually, I know Sadaf from North Carolina. My parents are still in North Carolina. We were just chatting before this all started. We haven't seen each other in like 20 years, but we both know each other from North Carolina. I'm in Michigan now. But I was able to, I'm just going into a little story, but I was able to see my nephew over the holidays. We were able to drive down, and we quarantined and everything. Disclaimer, we quarantined and everything before we went. But my brother's married now, and he's got, now he has 3 little ones, 3 under 3. And his son is the oldest, he's 2.5. And he was praying with my boys. So my kids range in, my oldest, I have 2 boys, 14 and 12. And then my younger 2 are girls. They're 8, and the youngest just turned 6. And so my nephew was praying with us. He's 2.5. And so, you know, it's always funny seeing very little kids, because they stand up with you, they follow all the moves. And my oldest son actually like scratched his nose in the middle of prayer, and my nephew scratched his nose right after that. So, I mean, it just shows that when kids are young, of course, they're, you know, we are modeling when even we don't realize what we're doing, we're modeling for them. And so in many, I think, Muslim households, we see little kids, especially when they see their parents praying, boys or girls will take like, because we all cover our hair when we pray, they'll take like a scarf or something, and they'll cover, or a blanket, and they'll like cover their whole head. In terms of my daughter, you know, and that's, I think it's, I want to have, and I do have like open conversations with her. But I definitely want her to make her own decision. And I would want her to be kind of old enough that she, you know, kind of not just understands why she's doing it, but kind of understands like what this means in society. And I think that although people change, and then that's kind of one of my lessons from all this, is that sometimes when you make a decision, whether you are a teenager, whether you're in college, whether post-college, like I think we're constantly in a state of flux, and our spirituality is always changing too. Sometimes, depending on who you're around, you're going to feel really motivated and into it, and like, I can do this. And other times when you find yourself being the only Muslim in many spaces, and, you know, in graduate school or in your line of work, you know, it's going to be, you're going to feel it. It is going to be harder. So, you know, so these are important conversations to have. Is that something that you're okay with? Are you okay with doing this if it's just you, not just because the people that are around you are doing it? So I definitely am, you know, starting to have those conversations with her, and want to continue to have those conversations with her. And to be honest, I mean, obviously this is the other thing too. I wear a hijab, I put it on every day, but I don't remember that I'm wearing it all the time. And I think, you know, I'm sure Uzma feels this way too. It's like, we don't really always notice if people are treating us differently, because we just forget that we kind of stick out a little bit. So there's kind of that part. So we just, you know, there's so many aspects of being a good person, embodying your religious beliefs, embodying your spirituality, how much you want to put out there, how much you want to have as part of your identity, as your external identity. There's so many facets. I mean, honestly, hijab obviously is a very, it's kind of something that's always there. It's a constant, and it's very outward. But there's so many other facets to being, you know, what we consider being a good Muslim and a good person really the same, you know. So I definitely, and I want my kids to understand that too. My kids have gone through mostly and majority, well, basically Islamic schools or private parochial schools. Now my oldest is in public, and I just want to make sure that he understands that that knowledge is lifelong, that you continue to strive for knowledge and you continue to learn, and you be a good person, you be a good Muslim, in every way, inwardly and outwardly and externally.
I love that. Thank you so much, Sabah. I really appreciate that viewpoint. And so my question to Uzma, and I have a feeling I know what the answer is going to be. I was in a Facebook group chat today where a male, made a big point about, talking about National Hijab Day, what we're going to do, and how we should pray for all the sisters that have gone astray and are not wearing hijab. And it kind of started in this whole conversation about whether or not he had a right to talk about, what a woman should wear or what a woman shouldn't wear. So, Uzma, as somebody who wears hijab, how do you feel about our male counterparts telling us what we should or shouldn't be wearing, whether it's on our bodies or on our heads?
It's the same thing I say when it comes to reproductive rights. No uterus, no opinion. So hijab, because it is a feminist statement, and because it is a personal choice, nobody, man, woman, or child should be speaking about an individual's choice whether to cover or not to cover. And for like the haram police, which is like the everything is not permitted police, which we have a lot of, sadly, in our community, I just want to reiterate that, yes, I'm not a scholar, but my personal belief is that getting into heaven and hell is not going to be dependent upon a little piece of cloth on our heads or the lack of it. I really truly believe that the God that we learn about in Islam, the thing that we call him first before anything else, is the most merciful, the most benevolent. So he would not, put our salvation for all of eternity on a hijab alone. So I would say that to these haram police, a lot of whom, I would say the majority, are men, but they have, inculcated that same misogyny in women. And so a lot of it comes from women as well, who hate on non-hijabis or even on hijabis. Like, you're not wearing your hair is coming out, or your clothes don't go with your hijab, that, hijab is all your, what, shut up. If it's not on your body, then I don't think that you have a right to say anything about it. And if it's not on her body, then we also don't have a right to say anything about it. Certainly if you have a penis, just sit down.
And you heard it here straight from her head. So thank you so much for that. And it's funny because both of us have only one girl. And 3 boys amongst us.
Yes.
So we're definitely, as much as we love the feminine power, we're raising some Muslim boys there too. So we do like boys too. So I just want to say that. So Sadaf, so one of the things I wanted to point out and to ask you directly, because I feel like, for me personally, I don't have to wear hijab to feel close to God, or for it to kind of infringe on my personal connection and spirituality. What is your take on not wearing hijab and your connection to your personal spirituality?
Yeah, so I really like what Uzma said, that, it's not even one of the primary tenets of Islam. If you study the Quran, study scholarly work, there's so many things that are emphasized over and above, yet hijab becomes the one symbol that everybody judges you based on. Are you a good Muslim or not? To me, I agree with everything Sabah said about modeling. I mean, it's so important for me personally with my kids. And I've noticed, like prayer, right? It's huge. And it's one of those things that it's so difficult, especially with kids that have distractions, to inculcate the desire to pray, to always be there. And so for me personally, that happens to be the way that I connect the most with my religion, with God. It's my personal space, my personal time, where we really just have a conversation, and I feel clarity through that. And to me, that's such a sacred connection and such a strong connection that it makes me confident in my day-to-day choices. So, I know what feels right. I have beliefs about this benevolent God, like Uzma said, and to me, I don't even think about, oh, should I be covering my hair or should I not? I know that I achieved this point in my journey through the best of intentions, through everything I could do. And so I'm comfortable with that. I'll be honest with you. The only time it really comes up is among other Muslims. And there is a lot of judgment there. We talked about harassing hijabis, and that's certainly a huge concern in the wider world. But I will say that there is an issue within the Muslim world with people that are judgmental, that are essentially pushing women who don't cover their hair away from mosques and places of worship because they feel judged. And actually probably not just women that don't cover their hair, even women that cover their hair, as Uzma pointed out, oh, maybe their hijab isn't covering enough, or maybe there's a hair peeking out, and people can be very vocal and judgmental about that. And so I see that as a challenge that we need to address within the community, because there's nothing as amazing as the feeling of being able to pray in a mosque, I feel like. And yet there are times when I'm just like, do I really want to deal with the aunties there that are going to have something to say? Maybe not. So.
And by aunties, we're talking about the women that are at the mosque door, that are looking for everything that you're doing wrong, not what you're doing right, and pointing it out to you. So I've been there too, Sadaf, so I definitely understand. I definitely understand where you're coming from. So I'm going to give you a little bit more of a lighthearted question, Sabah. What is the silliest thing someone has said to you about wearing hijab?
That's kind of a interesting one. Let's see. I mean, there's always like a few, and I'm sure Uzma's gotten these questions too, like, do you take a shower with it? Can your husband see your hair? I think this was in college and med school. I think I got this question, like, does the color have anything to symbolize anything? Does it have anything to do with your mood or anything like that? Actually, one of the most endearing stories was, I think, when I was an undergrad, and there was, it was in the summer. I think it was in the summer, because this was actually, I was taking another class at another campus over the summer. And speaking of not modeling, but people noticing you when you don't think that they're looking, I was going through kind of a little phase where I was like, I'm going to try to dress a little bit more modestly. And so for, a few months, like I was like trying to wear more skirts and stuff, and I don't do that anymore. But I think the only reason it comes up is because another student was asking me about hijab, and she noticed that I would also wear, I wasn't really wearing pants anymore, and mostly skirts. And I was like, well, it's kind of, it's a process, and it's just something that I'm kind of looking into, and I gave my explanation. And then, a few months later, I was back to wearing pants, and she noticed it, and she was like, oh, what happened to our process? I felt so called out. But it was really cute. So yeah, that was cute. I was going to say something else. Well, actually, sorry. No, go ahead and say it, Sabah.
Oh, I love that. So the hijab is not a mood ring.
Yeah, no.
I say that ahead of time. So I definitely, I remember I was with I had a college friend, and while I was sitting with her, somebody literally asked her if she had ears. It was literally a serious question. And I have to say, she was so sweet about it. Like, I would not have been as nice as she was. And she was just like, yes, because I can hear you right now asking me this question. So she was just a very sweet, polite way of doing it. So I just thought I would lighten the mood with that. But Uzma, like, do you find nowadays, like, I've noticed a lot of people wearing hijab kind of like post 9/11, or even in the Trump era, like Sadaf was mentioning, more as like a political symbol of, like you said, wearing your faith literally on the outside of your I'm sorry, can you hear me now, Kathleen? Thank you so much. Now you can hear me. Sorry. Do you find that there's this movement a little bit about wearing hijab as a political statement? And if so, how do you feel about that?
I don't know if anybody I don't know anybody who's wearing hijab as a political statement. I can say that since the 90s, there's been a huge number of new hijabis. Post the last administration, there's been a lot of hijabis who have left the hijab. I think that's more of a political statement than donning it. I think the donning of it, from my experience, and that's the only one I can speak about, is a lot of these women are doing their research and they're realizing that we cannot trust just the word of our elders and the generations before us telling us what's right, especially because they don't practice it. So when they're researching it on their own, they're finding that this is one way for them to connect to God. So I don't really think that that's political. Would I have a problem with somebody making a political statement? I'll tell you what, when all the women were wearing the flag as a hijab in 2016, I had a problem with that. I didn't like that political statement. And I don't know what it was. It just, I really felt like, you know, the flag was robbed from us as Americans. And it just seemed like, you know, not that you're inciting the opposition when you're putting the flag on your head, but you're wearing what they now claim is their symbol. And I didn't want them to do that. So that was where, you know, I would say that I was not okay with it. But I would also say that if you do anything that is not for the sake of Allah first, which is the primary requirement for everything we do, then I would also not be okay with that kind of a hijab. If you're not doing it for Allah, my suggestion would be go back and check your priorities, because if you do it for any other reason, it's not going to stick. It just won't.
I agree with that. It's all about intentions and your own personal relationship to God. So I appreciate that. But before we open it up for questions, I just wanted to ask all you lovely ladies for some final thoughts or something that you wish that the audience did know a little bit about hijab and the concept of hijab and modesty. And we'll start with Sabah first.
Yeah, so I guess what I would want to say, especially given that I'm the only one on the panel, or other than Zeba, who isn't covering, is that, you know, I would hate for anyone to take away from this that I speak for all women that don't cover their hair. I don't. This is my personal journey, my personal belief. And I will say that there's a huge variety among other women who don't cover for why they don't cover. There are some who believe that it is required, but just don't, you know, have what they consider to be the strength to do it, although that's not how I would put it, but that is how I've seen it framed. And also there are others who, you know, have worn it in the past, and then again, because they fear discrimination or backlash, they feel like they shouldn't do it. They don't want essentially a target on themselves. And that, and just as a side note, there is a litany of scholarly opinions on that particular issue where even if it's required, you are allowed to take it off when it threatens your safety and well-being. So, you know, essentially there's many reasons that women might choose to cover or not to cover. And I certainly don't want to discredit, you know, anyone's view on any of that. Again, I think, you know, everybody has the journey that takes them to this point.
That's a really good point. Like, and I'm one of those that don't wear hijab, and don't feel that I need to wear hijab. So I do want to specify that I don't feel like I'm lacking in anything, and I don't feel like. So I wanted to point that out, though I'm not technically on the panel, so I wanted to give Sadaf some support. But I, you know, and I talk about that openly in our podcast. That is just not something that I ever feel like I have to do. But I really respect the people that do it. And if you feel like that's your journey to get you closer to God, then by all means you need to do what you need to do. So I just wanted to say that really specifically. But Sabah, can you do you have anything that you would like to add before we start taking questions?
Yeah, I was thinking also, you know, kind of going back to what you were saying about interesting comments that you've gotten, or you asked the funniest thing that's, you know, that someone said. I can think back to something that was something interesting that a medical student actually asked me when she was rotating with me when I was a resident. She was so I'm a psychiatrist, and so she was doing her psychiatry rotation, and she kind of said something. She was a Muslim student, by the way, and she basically asked me, like, do you ever feel like your scarf gets in the way of like your interactions with patients? And I thought that was an interesting question. And I mean, to be honest, I was a little bit annoyed with it because I like to think that it's not. But the interesting thing about psychiatry is that we do examine all of those things. Like there's nothing that you don't really ignore anything. Everything is fair game. Everything that's in the room could be something that has an impact in that therapeutic process. And I would like to think that I'm pretty good at reading people and connecting with people and making a connection with people. But I think in some ways, I mean, whether you wear hijab or not, you're not always gonna, be everything for everybody, and that's okay. I know that the secretaries and the people that work at my front desk, a lot of times many times they'll get a question like, oh, well, is this doctor, where is she from? And they'll get very defensive. They're like, she's American. Or they'll ask things like, does she speak English? Does she have an accent? And they feel very defensive of me. But I do feel once we are in the room and we start talking about what brings them into the office, like what they're dealing with in terms of depression or anxiety or things like that. Once we start getting into it and the focus is on them, and of course the relationship with me and them, the relationship with their doctor, I feel like it kind of, I don't think that does get in the way. And I think in general, that's just right. Really kind of what I'm doing at work is I'm listening to people, their conversations. As I'm listening, I'm, thinking about how I can help them in terms of treatment. And that's kind of all it is. It's like kind of connecting with each other in general on a one-to-one basis. Actually, I feel very comfortable in my work environment. Sometimes when I'm in public, and I've been fortunate and have had many acts of discrimination or hate crimes, acts of hate or anything against me. But I do feel like when I'm out of my element, I do feel a little bit vulnerable at times, that there's other people that all they are seeing is a scarf. They're not seeing anything about my background or education or how I'm helping society, contribute to society. And it really can just be like, it can just be simplified and dumbed down to just like one article of clothing that's supposed to define me. So yeah, I kind of wanted to end with that. And also, just kind of how we were talking about growing up in this post 9/11 time, I think it is really interesting because all of us, actually, we're all the same generation. You think back on it, this is 20 years of like kind of being like under this microscope. And it's kind of strange. We are in this post-Trump, and it doesn't mean that any of that has gone away. But now with everything that happened, in the last weeks, it's like, you know what? Maybe we weren't really the big problem to begin with, actually. And that's kind of weird. It's like all of a sudden we're not talking about the axis of evil or talking about, like those foreign, I'm going to say the T word, right? Like looking at foreign elements of terrorism. And it's kind of strange. It's like the first time in my life I'm not hearing Muslim names in the news constantly. And so I think that's going to be interesting. It's kind of like I feel like emerged from this post 9/11, of course it's still there, but I think all of us are like, hey, we can't just point fingers outside. We all have to look kind of internally, like what's going on.
I definitely appreciate. We have somebody in the audience who is actually a captain with the Fairfax County Police Department who really had come to the panel today because he said he wanted to hire some female officers wearing hijab and wanted to learn a little bit about it. So the fact that we've had these types of conversations so frankly, even within our own communities, I definitely appreciate it. And I think Uzma's kids are making dinner for her right now. So I'm super proud of her for that, for instilling in them the concept of making their own food. Her son is cooking dinner for everybody tonight. But Uzma, do you have any final thoughts, my dear?
No, I'm just going to ride on Sadaf's coattails and say that no religion has or is a monolith, right? Like when people, the silliest question that I ever get is, how come they don't cover but you do? And I say, I don't know, go ask her, because that is true. Like, why are you asking me about somebody else's experience? I don't live her life. I don't have her experiences. Go find out from her. But also, do all Jews practice the same? Do all Christians practice the same? Do all Hindus practice the same? And do you practice every single tenet of your religion? No, everybody practices a little bit differently. Even within Islam, we have so many variations. There are things that you practice, Seba, every morning that it's going to take an act of God to get me to get that, focused on my spirituality. But we find other ways. And that's kind of what I follow that up with to people. I'm like, when you can find just a homogenous group of Jews, you let me know, and I am going to go to that synagogue just to witness it. And I kind of reiterate that the same is for Muslims. We come in all shapes and sizes. We come in all kinds of groups and practices. We are the same as you in that sense. So please give us that much credit. And to Sabah's point, I have, as a physician, felt always protected in that bubble because I'm not going to face the kind of discrimination that the average Muslim woman in the workplace is going to potentially face, because when people's lives and deaths are in my hand, they don't give a damn what I call God. They want me to help them immediately. Now, once they get over that hump, they can always say, get her off the case, but that hasn't happened because I'm really good at what I do. Now, outside of the workplace, I think my experience, it's the same. We have a level playing ground. And so we've been subject to those things, but nobody has ever, nobody has successfully intimidated me. Let's just say that. Alhamdulillah.
Well, I love hearing that, and I wanted to thank you and Sabah specifically for being on the front lines with all of this COVID stuff, dealing from the mental health aspects, because we're all dealing with that. Let's just be real. But we have some questions in the audience right now. So this is from somebody in the audience. She wants to know, why do some Muslim women in more conservative countries like Saudi Arabia has covered their face and their head? Are both pieces of cloth considered hijab, or is the piece covering the face something totally different? Sabah, did you want to answer this question?
Sure. I mean, and Sadaf and Uzma, please jump in as well. But yeah, actually, that is something a little bit different. So basically, the face covering is called a niqab. And you see that definitely most commonly in Saudi Arabia. But there are other parts of the world where, where people do wear it. If you think back to like the 2000s when we were talking more about Afghanistan, they also, kind of have a form of covering where their face is covered too. That's kind of what they call the burqa. But it's basically anytime you're covering the face, that's called a niqab. And it's kind of, I don't want to, yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, Zeba answered that too. Yeah, basically it's called a niqab. And I know many people, when this question comes up, oftentimes will answer it like, well, that's kind of a little bit particular to maybe like that part of the world or culture. But I guess I will say that you will see it. Well, you will see people that cover their face even in America that might not be from those certain countries. And that is because they are their interpretation or they're choosing to cover like even extra. I guess, Uzma, how would you answer that question?
Pretty much the same. It's a face covering, and it is probably, when it comes to even within women who cover, it's really controversial, because obviously the women who cover say that it's required for all women. The women who don't practice it say no, it was specifically for the wives of Muhammad, because there's a verse that says, have your wives do this, but they were instructed after his death to keep a curtain between themselves and their students. So all of the Muslims came to these wives to learn. So our first teachers after Muhammad were his wives, were women. So they created this barrier to do it, but when they left the house, they also covered their faces. Now, interestingly, when we're praying, we are not to cover our faces, and certainly the Hajj, which is the once in a lifetime pilgrimage that Muslims are required to do if they can afford it and they're physically able. Women who do cover their face are not allowed to cover their face over there, because one of the points of Islam and the practice or the ritual of Hajj is that all of humanity is the same in front of God. And so we don't make any kind of distinctions, including like our levels of covering. So our faces are exposed at that point. That's all I would say about that.
And also the wives of the prophet were not permitted. They weren't supposed to get married after
Right.
the prophet, peace be upon him, died too.
Yeah.
So they were kind of like, they're known as like the mothers of the believers. They're very venerated as teachers and kind of like all of our mothers. So they kind of held a different position too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like a form of protection for them.
Specifically for them,
Is-
yeah.
For specifically
But
for them.
now again, the ones that do practice niqab to this day would say no, it meant for all of his, because it was for your wives and daughters was the verse to Muhammad. So, technically we're like the daughters of Muhammad too, is, where they come from.
Got it. See, I learned something new here today as well. Thank you so much for that. And I know that Sadaf has to jump off right now. So if we have any other questions, you can put it in the chat or you can ask Rabinder. Otherwise, I think we're getting close to time.
Oh, somebody's asking about the texts that you use to research. Sadaf, do you want to answer that before you have to jump off if you have time?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, I do unfortunately have to go in a few minutes, but so there are several verses that are cited in support of hijab, and if I'm not going to be able to quote them, but there is, there's variations of them. There's some that are sort of directed to the wives of the prophet, and then there's others that refer to like a khimar and pulling it to cover your bosom area. And so basically they're verses and they're widely available. So if you just do a Google search for verses supporting hijab, you'd be able to go right to them. But in terms of the context and the scholarly work, I would really direct you to the work of Khalid Abu al-Fadl, who I mentioned earlier. He studied in the Middle East for over 13 years as an Islamic scholar, has studied, the context, done a deep dive. He now is, I think, in Southern California. He's a professor. But if you read his work, he will explain, a lot of the context and a lot of the sort of deeper meaning in terms of looking at it from a contextual and scholarly point of view.
Was there a certain book that you read by him in particular? I've read his book, The Tolerance in Islam, I think, but.
There was, and I just don't remember since it's been so long, but I might message you with it. But yeah, I mean, he is one of them, and there's a couple of others too that, and I will say that this is something that has been discussed a lot recently. And so again, Google searches will turn up a lot of different articles that summarize some of them. So I encourage you to look at that, but those are the main ones that I relied on. And with that, I am going to have to exit. Thank you so much for having me.
I was going to add, I just ran to my bookshelf. So 20 years ago, before I was applying to med school, I kind of went through this thing where I was like, should I go into academics? And I was interested in maybe getting a PhD in Islamic studies, or basically more the historical Near East studies type of thing. Anyway, this is a book that I read during that time, and I really liked it because it actually, and I'll share the title, and I read it 20 years ago, and I'm like, I need to read it again because I have all these stickers and underlinings. I'm like, wow, I found this book. I really like this book. It's called Rethink, and it's going to come up backwards, but it's called Rethinking Muslim Women in the Veil, Challenging Historical and Modern Stereotypes by Catherine Bullock. I think this was her basically during, based kind of on her PhD dissertation and kind of expanded. But I really like this because it actually I learned a lot through this, and it actually goes through a lot of the history, like in the last century too. And speaking of, and I kind of wanted to add this too, when we were talking about the question about politics, actually throughout history, oftentimes hijab has been tied in with politics, and it kind of goes both ways. And I learned that from this book. There's been times in history where women were like not allowed to wear the scarf. They were like forced to remove it. And there's been other times that they were forced to wear it. Especially in the last century, when we're talking about like post-colonialism and all that, that's like a whole area of study, but which I find really interesting because it's like, I think exactly, Uzma said this, anytime someone is dictating what you should do with your body, whether it's wearing it, whether it's covering yourself or forcing you not to wear what you feel is comfortable and modest, both of those are infringing on your rights as a female, right? And the point is that somebody else is telling you what to do. But I really like this book too. I can put it in the chat also.
Yeah, do you mind putting it in the chat, Sabah? I definitely appreciate it. We have another a question about what's the history and the purpose of World Hijab Day. Uzma, did you want to take that question, my dearest?
Yeah, so I believe it was founded in 2013 by, I think it was an American Muslim, Nazma Khan, as kind of support to Muslim women all over the world who do practice it, because, you know, I think what ends up happening is we get a lot of hate or we get a lot of empathy, and neither are welcome. You know, the idea that somebody would choose to cover up their bodies, people don't understand that as a feminist statement, because, you know, what is feminism? Burn your bras and like make it legal for women to walk around bearing their breasts, make it legal to breastfeed, which by the way it is in all states, but some, you know, states we know like breasts are so over sexualized. In Islam, outside of Islam, we feel like everybody who's viewing us views the hijab as sexual too. And, you know, it is gendered, certainly. You know, women are the ones who are practicing. There is a hijab for men as well, you know, which is also in Islamic law, but people don't pay a lot of attention to that. So I believe most of the Islamophobic acts are geared against Muslim women because they are so visible when they wear a hijab, right? You're very easy to target. So it just kind of came up to support women. And I believe worldhijabday.com has a website devoted to the history and movements and events related to this day that you can look up online. And I'll put that in the chat.
So it's a relatively new concept, actually, if we think about it, and part of it is because, you know, we're just trying to gain an understanding and a commonality, which is kind of what whoever came to this discussion here today is hoping to do, and we're trying to bridge the gap between the religion and our faith and the culture, and recognizing that we're all Americans here today. And we wanted to thank again Fairfax County Library Systems for hosting us on this National World Hijab Day and opening up these types of conversations. And we really appreciate everybody that has been here